Let's talk about Stonehell Dungeon down Night Haunted Halls. This is technically volume 1 of 2. It doesn't say so on the front, I don't think. As we see here, it's a classic megadungeon setting for use with Labyrinth Lord and early versions of the original fantasy role-playing game. So Labyrinth Lord is a retro clone, is the technical phrase we use for Dungeons and Dragons Basic and Expert, which was a sort of successor game to the very earliest versions of D&D, and came out alongside Advanced D&D, albeit generally as a less important part of the line for a long time. Very popular with old school gamers. Labyrinth Lord was pretty much the first big retro clone, as far as I know, of Basic. The big one running now is Old School Essentials, yeah, and then Lamentations of the Flame Princess is sort of both a retro clone and a new spin that came, I think, after Labyrinth Lord. Correct me if I'm wrong. By Michael Curtis. As you see, we've got a official Labyrinth Lord compatible product marker. This is 138 pages, and the last couple are licensing guff, but 130 pages or so. So of course we're not going to be going through everything, and I will skip around a bit. So this is just the top half of the Stonehell Megadungeon. A Megadungeon is a sort of enormous, complex, hundreds of rooms which the players can play in really for years, and is the centerpiece of a campaign. You are not assuming that there is any other major part of the game necessarily. You know, it might just be you go in there and you go to town and you go back. Not all Megadungeons are like that. But say here's some famous Megadungeons if you really have no idea of the idea. Gary Gygax's original campaign and his friend Dave Arneson's, both original campaigns were based around Megadungeons. Castle Greyhawk for Gygax, Castle Blackmoor for Arneson. And that didn't mean they only restricted themselves to those Megadungeons, but massive part of the play was based around there. And Undermountain, Ed Greenwood's great Megadungeon, which was the first campaign in the Forgotten Realms, basically. And the principle came in part, at least, from the principle of us thinking Megadungeons as this centerpiece, is embedded in the rules. What do levels mean? You actually see this in even up to AD&D First Edition. The DMG talks about the idea that you've got first level characters, first level monsters, first level spells, and first level of dungeons, and the idea is that these correspond at some level, and not completely, spells don't map, but the idea everything else kind of is meant to correspond roughly. That, you know, a first level character and a first level, i.e. a 1 HD monster, are roughly equivalent, and they belong on average together on the first level of the dungeon. Of course, you might go deeper when you're lower level, or more dangerous monsters might be further up for various reasons. But that's the rough. If there was early balancing, it's that, more or less, and it's embedded, therefore, in the very rules that, you know, we still use some of those phrases today. Stonehell is a 10-level dungeon with also an additional level 0 upper works and multiple sub-levels, and there's 2 supplements as well, which I think both are, at least one is, just an above ground area that you can also go to. There's no town detailed. There's no sort of wider campaign mod assumed other than the particular background to Stonehell, and that's sort of the assumption is you're just playing a campaign where you go down here, and there could be side quests and side adventures, but they don't really need to be. There are, I guess, each level, ignoring everything else, each level is about 100 rooms. So the main dungeon is about 1,000 rooms, plus the rooms in the surface level, or buildings or areas, plus the sub-levels, plus the supplements. It's absolutely enormous. Split into 2 for that reason. It's originally, originally from 2011? Here, Labyrinth Lord was copyrighted 2009. I don't remember off the top of my head. So we got a welcome and a how to use, and it says you could use it as presented. You could use it as a framework by constructing one's own Megadungeon complex by swapping in and out what you like. The modular nature of Stonehell Dungeon, we'll look at that in a bit, means that you can swap quadrants out. The final way is to do so piecemeal and use them as dungeons. And this is, in a sense, it's self-evident, isn't it? If you're in the old school corners of the internet enough that you're thinking, yeah, I'll buy this book Stonehell, then you're going to think, well, I can probably just take what I want from this. But it's an interesting point that he's trying to say, look, this is this is just an enormous thing, and there are many ways of using it, and it's okay to do that, and in fact it's good to DM like that sometimes. I think there's, and maybe that's something that even in some, particularly in the late noughties, early tens, you still have an emergent OSR, and I wonder whether or not there might be some sense that, okay, we need to help train DMs to build worlds and to do what they want with material, rather than think, well, I've bought the latest 3rd edition module, or 4th edition module, I guess, by 2009 or something. I've got to run it as is. And this, to be fair, this happens in play once you've run a couple of campaigns. So my first 2 D&D campaigns were 4th edition, the ones I ran, at least. I played a couple of games before that, maybe ever, but yeah. And I'm kind of, the first one very linear, but I still had to adapt because my players would be like, oh well, what happens if you do this? And I'd say, well, okay, we better find out. In the second one, I try to make it slightly more open, with more player decisions, and there's a good module, Reavers of Harkenwald, from the D&D Essentials core set, 4th edition. It's genuinely an interesting module, but it's something where even there, it has so much promise and areas they could go, and the players were like, oh, what happens if we go here and try to get them to help us? And you kind of had to improvise, and so you learn it already if you play and run enough. But here, this is just saying you don't have to respect the author, as it were. There's an authorial intent, but there's also possibilities beyond that. Anyway, long way of saying that's a nice thing. History. This is what there are a few pages of background, and we'll skip through them. Basically, it's built as a prison, but actually there's lower complexes that are already there, and eventually it was abandoned, and now there's a chaos creature involved, and this kind of sets up this quite grim place, really. And there's lots of residents. Things change all the time. There's a restock table. This is a very basic restock model. Essentially, it's the easiest method of keeping it fresh and challenging. It's actually the David Bowman table. We're on the table in between adventures to determine if a room the PCs have previously explored has become home to new monsters and treasure. So there's a 1 in 3 chance of a new monster, a 1 in 6 chance of new treasure. There's, although it could be that there's new hidden treasure as well. So there's technically a second 1 in 6 chance off a 2 in 3 chance. Anyway, that does lead to a very high level of restocking. It's a popular basic model. I think more organic ways, you might use some determination, like 1 in 6 it's been restocked if more than a week has passed, and then you as the DM decide what goes in there. But it's a quick and nasty way of doing it. And customizing stuff, and yeah, he just says change stuff. Give some overviews of mysteries that you might want to find out about. Rumours, and there are also some. There's some hooks for the local area. Oh, maybe you want to go and deal with some goblin raiders. You've been hired to go to an old abandoned magic laboratory. There are trolls who raid by night, and you have to fight them. They're secret enemies. And then there's rumours. This is all very functional. I think something that intermittently phases in and out throughout Stonehell, I think, is a certain basically it's both a strength and a weakness that large parts of it, particularly in the upper levels, and this is partly intentional, I think, that it's concentrated further up, is that it's more vanilla. It's more like, oh, this is just what D&D is. There's goblins, there's kobolds, look, there's so some oozes, there's some rats, just very simple stuff that you're used to doing early in a campaign, and then it gets weirder and more flavoured as you go down. And I don't disagree with that decision necessarily at all, but I think here this is an example where just lots of the things aren't very exciting, or if they are, they're fine. An old gold mine connects with a dungeon. True. Anyone staying in the dungeon will rise as an undead monster. False. One section of the dungeon is filled with dangerous plants. True. These are fine, but they are very sparse and not evocative. And I do think that if we buy stuff, and this is, you know, this is a question about kind of business, as it were, and what is the paid for section of the market for. If we buy stuff, then I think we're buying it because it's better than what we come up with on our own or on the fly, at least in the sense that it's giving us ideas we wouldn't otherwise have had. And some people would say, well, I don't really care about the prose, then I just need the ideas. Just tell me an idea. But even there's a way of being evocative and dense. You know, do you describe something in 4 incredibly weighty, evocative words, or in like a paragraph of beautiful prose? Or do you just not get either of those? You know, it's just dull or it's confusing. Now this is, we go to the surface level, the upper works. There is a way, and it's pretty explicit, I think. He does say fairly early on that this is kind of how he sees about it, thinks about it. Is it... Does it actually say? But yeah, this is a bit like, I talked about this in my Nominal Subsurface Volume 1, Environments Volume 1 review, ASE 1. ASE is a really good third of a mega dungeon, and you can extrapolate a bit from Patrick Wetmore's posts and you can get another 1/5 or something. But really it's incomplete but brilliant, and you're going to have enough to play with for ages anyway. But there are a couple of intro dungeons. There's literally a tiny intro dungeon that's pretty linear, and then there is an actual intro dungeon which is the upper works of the ASE itself, and you get in to that via using one MacGuffin, and then you have to go and sort out another MacGuffin to get into the main 10 levels. And there the setting is more gonzo compared to vanilla. It's more ridiculous, it's more over the top. You're fighting like a tribe of the character Mock from Thundar the Barbarian to start with, but they're all radioactively poisoned. Then there's decrepit robots who repair themselves with human bone. It's mad. It's very different to this, but there's a similarity that I think there's an assumption the upper works are partly to both ease you in to the setting and also to teach you, you know, to play. The things that are not just less challenging, but there's a kind of a smaller scale here, and I think the proof of that literally is that this is 2 quadrants rather than 4, and the main levels are all 4. Here this is 2 sections, and this is what it means by quadrants. You can swap in one of those 2 halves with something else. That's what it means. If you don't like something, you just can remove an entire section if you really don't like it. And some of the quadrants are less good, so it makes sense. There's also technically a dungeon in here, which is this, translating to this. So it is, yeah, it's got, you can see there's the layout. Now this is maybe the next thing to talk about, because we're going to have to take in most respects a summary view. Is that there are some really interesting layout decisions which are basically quite successful on the whole. So that is because I don't have it in spreads, we're going to have to work this out. This is going to be a left-hand page, and there's going to be a right-hand page. So you've got maps, and then you have an introduction with a monster list, and then you have a 2-page spread on a quadrant, and then you have a 2-page spread on that quadrant in key form. So you have written up details of that particular quadrant, and then you have a 2-page spread which is like, hey, this is what's actually there. And so we'll go over this just as a sample of the whole, because I think that's probably the best way to deal with this is basically how the layout is throughout the entire book, so it's not, we don't need to repeat ourselves. So you have, yeah, that's the intro stuff. So then we come down and we have the surface level master map, and that has all the mapping information you need, including a legend, and the legend is used throughout. Perfectly clear maps. They are reminiscent, of course, here with the many caves, particularly reminiscent of B2 or even B1, but I think they're very reminiscent of B modules, and it's not in blue, so you can photocopy it, but there's something of that feel intentionally, that's what it looks like. Then you have a few paragraphs saying what it's like. It tells you what you should do as you look at different, where they might go. Description. The prose, Curtis's prose is basically never particularly exciting. He is not a stylist. This is not a criticism. per se. As I said, there's an issue of evocative prose that I think is fair to raise. Like, the more evocative and more, in that sense, terse, the combination of the two is very powerful. Curtis is either functional or terse. Never really anything. Never any adjectives added to that. I think any additional compounds. So Stonehell Dungeon is located beneath the foothills of a mountain chain that lays a half day's travel from the nearest large settlement. Its location is well known to local residents, and most can provide directions to the old road that leads to the dungeon. The road splits off from the main thoroughfare a few miles outside of town, and although neglected, the old military road still shows signs of regular traffic. That's fine. You get what you need from it, but it's not adding anything extra other than you knowing what you need to be able to say. And that's, he wants this to be functional, and that makes sense. You then get stats. These are summary stats. If they're new monsters, they get a full write-up as well. If they're not, like bat, normal, or skeleton, or rabid raccoon, you're looking at Labyrinth Lord for those. And I think there's an interesting thing. They'll come up again, but I'll put it here. I'll kind of interpolate my own thought about layout. But is that, this is very clearly laid out. We'll continue that in a second. But there's also a thing about system mastery that came out for me as I was reading it, which is that if you assume, and by that, for this is the DM, not the player. In D&D, the player may be seeking system mastery at some level, but the DM there's a necessity to have system competence at least. But here, the design rewards playing a system that has a kind of closed set of rules in a way. And that might seem, for some people, this is an interesting thing, isn't it, about what is the OSR or the NSR or whatever. But I think there's something where Curtis is saying, based on the assumptions of this actual book, Labyrinth Lord, this is what you can... this is designing a dungeon around that, with the monsters from that, so your reference is that, and the character races, as in character classes rather, from that. And particularly relevant for that is the race classes, because of the reactions that demi-humans have in different areas, particularly in lots of areas, dwarves, because they're underground. So there's a kind of a clever thing where he's heavily relying on something which is familiar to you as the Labyrinth Lord, as the DM, and he's letting that do work for him so he doesn't have to spend time writing. And that's not a bad thing. That's not uncreative. What he's doing instead is putting his time and effort into writing other stuff, into writing the dungeon. And that is probably, when you think about, I know this is obviously much longer, when you think about the kind of modern 20 or 30 page module you can get on drive-through, that spends half its time, it's got 5 pages intro and 20 pages of new monsters and new magic items and 5 pages of dungeons. Even if you really love the monsters and magic items, there's a good chance the dungeon is not, it is being wagged by its tail, basically. It's there, and the rest of the stuff is much more interesting, maybe even be better, whereas the dungeon is just there to functionally be there because that's the product. Whereas here, he's saying, look, I'm not creating loads of new stuff. Most of this is generic, but I'm going to use it in a way that teaches you how it exists, what it can be used for, and and then add stuff that really does add something to that. Anyway, moving on. The upper level is we'll go through this, but in terms of layout, what he'll do is he'll give an overview of the rules of the level, and then he'll give the key. And the overview is basically where, in a sense, a lot of the money is. Obviously, the key is the thing you're running, but the overview isn't just telling you what's there, but also has the special dungeon notes, which is where he's putting his most fun things, the things which are going to be most memorable, because they have special rules and stuff. And you get a saint's shrine, which if it's a fallen shrine, and if anyone wants to do a great task, they can be blessed. And there are, you as the Labyrinth Lord get to decide if it's a worthy one, and then the bonuses they might get, and they kind of have to pursue that quest. And it could be very small, it could be very big. There's also an important NPC. This is the other thing you get in this section, and this is a sort of semi-deferialized black bear, is it, or brown bear? Black bear, Cole, who knows the adventurers who come here, and therefore is not immediately aggressive, and it can be seen as a lucky. These are both quite nice and cute, and they're both kind of like threshold stuff, aren't they? The threshold ideas. That's not a bad example. There are others. You then get your map of the quadrant, the canyon east, and you get this is the key. This is for the key rather than the overall overview. You get a second view, cut out. You get encounter chart, and then you get special rules for things that are there. You get a sub dungeon note, the flame chalk message. You get features key, which is for special things which are not keyed areas but are things like describing a wall, the walls describing the way the trapdoors have been swollen, that sort of thing, and a new magical item. So this is a genuine innovation at the time. I think it comes before the real height of one-page dungeons, but there are some of that principle of the OPD, whether you like it or not, good or bad. There's some principles there that are here as well. Of I want to be able to open a spread and be able to run stuff from it. Here, it's that you're getting a dungeon, basically off 4 pages. I think that's the way to think about it. It's a 4-page dungeon. And there is an introductory section as well, which maybe it's useful to know, but so for instance the summary stats are on a 5th page, but it's a 4-page dungeon plus a monster stat card, and you're like, yeah, that's actually kind of, you can see that being spread out onto a poster format and just be like, this is what I'm running it off of. Now the flip side is that this exposes, and the key does as well to a degree, this is fine by the way, lots of empty rooms, fire beetle who's devouring a mountain goat kid, there's a deer carcass, windblown debris, that's where the mountain lion lives, who is much more dangerous than the bear. I think there's a point, is it here? The Labyrinth Lord might wish to dispense with the role altogether in the case of low-level adventurers, as the mountain lion can be formidable for beginning PCs. So there's a bit of DM advice that pops up here and there throughout like that. This is one of the more explicit times where it is, and I think it's because there's a sense this is an introductory area for players to get used to stuff. And one thing is that though it's probably rare, even now, especially now, I don't know, but even now, for really ingenue, never really played many role-playing game kind of people to buy a bunch of OSR books and be like, man, I really want to get into this. I think you could see it in the right context, with the right display, old school essentials on the shelf, or something, high production value stuff, maybe for people who've played some role-playing games before but never run something. You can imagine that kind of universe, but generally speaking, no one is buying these books as their first role-playing game. On the other hand, you can see players, I know this from personal experience, but significant personal experience, for many players there, it may well be their first RPGs are with OSR products, because that's just what their dad or their friend or the guy at the store or whatever has. So yeah, as I say, that is a real thing, and so having a genuine let's train people into this is not a bad idea. And the same with ASE, as I say. But the thing to say on top of that is this is very sparse and terse. These tend to be longer entries than in many of the rooms, many of the actual quadrants. So I think it's because there are fewer rooms. There are only 17 rooms rather than 25 or so. But I think there's an interesting thing, that the problem is not that they're terse. The interesting thing for me is the problem with these is not that they're terse. It's that there's a rather cold and iron discipline with lots of the sense of vanilla-ness. And there's some kind of nice bits. So it's a glowing room. Actually, it's a fire beetle. Flame chalk is a thing that is it revealed by fire? Let's remind ourselves. It's revealed by infra. You see it with infravision, so it has to be dark, and you see this glowing message. Yeah, I think there's some treasure. And in the fact that one of the treasure rooms is behind a mountain lion den, that's kind of a fun classic. You have to kill something to get somewhere, or at least you have to do something with that. And yeah, I mean, I think it's basically fine. but it's very often through Stonehell this rigid iron discipline to keep things fairly both simple and vanilla means, and he does partially try to resolve this in the appendices. I'll touch on that in a second, but I think it limits the attraction in that this is something which is easy to run. I don't have a physical copy, and I kind of wish I did actually, because I like the layout idea. I like the way that you can say, okay, we're in this area, okay, I need to, even if they're moving, you just flick a couple of pages. You have to do that with other stuff anyway, and it means you can get a lot of rooms in. In this book, this is a 550 room or thereabouts, 540 room dungeon equivalent, and he fits it into 130 pages. And you think you just can't have a page a room, and that'd be terrible anyway. Really, very rarely is a page a room justified. But you can't have 3 pages a room really, because you're still going to end up with hundreds without all the extra, the 30 or 40 pages of additional material. You're going to be into the 200s basically. So instead, and you don't have the maps in that either. So you're then adding, dozens of pages of quadrant maps and stuff, because there's 22 quadrants, so 24 pages. It'd be enormous. So this is efficient, it's easily read, but just some of it is dull, like it's not very exciting. Let's skip down a bit. There are lots of fun ideas. This is because the third area, the Gates of Hell, is the gatehouse at the front, and there's some cute magical items: chill guard, parasol, journey cloak. These are actually some of my favourite magic items in the whole book, ironically. But the idea that one is a parasol that guards you from cold spells, and a journey cloak protects you against extreme weather. Yeah, I will generally I'll avoid dumping all of the level maps out, but we'll just look at this. This is a good example of this is the first level. This is just generally how they are. 4 quadrants. That means just as you've had three quadrants technically, albeit one being a bit slightly different and slightly smaller, I think. In the surface level, you now have 4 quadrants, and these quadrants are roughly 25 rooms. It varies. I mean, you can see they're each individually numbered, they're not continuously numbered. That is better generally, I think. But you've got 40 rooms in that one. You have, or thereabouts, 39. You have 26 rooms in that one. In this one, you go up to 39, basically because there's a lot of stuff around here in Kobold Corners. And here you get up to 33. So, no, I say this, it's not even... Some of the levels are more like 25 per quadrant, but here they're all into the 30s. And that's, to be fair, there are a couple of others like that I can remember off the top of my head as well. So, again, it's very big. But you could swap any of these out. His idea is that if you don't like it, just draw a new map or use the map and restock it. You don't have to use the thing he's written. And if I were running it, I think I'd be tempted to with some of it, because some of it doesn't connect into the bigger mysteries of Stonehell very much. You could retain what it did and is less exciting. Here, this is meant to be, I think it's fair to say, this is your vanilla introduction. You're meant to come to the first level. You've fought your way through a couple of things on the surface. You might just have gone down straight away. This might be the first experience, like the entrance in Hell's Antechamber, which is where's the entrance to Hell's Antechamber? Sounds like I'm talking about a real place, doesn't it? Here, spiral staircase there. You could just go straight there pretty much, as long as you avoid encounters. You might see something along the way. But the idea, you thought there's been some goblins upstairs in the gatehouse. There's been some gribblies and monsters. You've found a cool shrine. You might not have cleared all of that. You might come back to it at a different time to make a base. It seems obvious, actually. That's one thing. He doesn't even address this, Curtis, but if you pick up a bunch of hirelings, if you build a company, there's not really any reason why you shouldn't be clearing the gatehouse and holding it for your own, though that might have repercussions from dungeon inhabitants. If you have a functional company with especially if you have like a large party of adventurers, you could garrison it in some way. But that depends on the campaign world you have around it. Going down, it's going to be harder because it's so much more open. Yeah, so Hell's Antechamber, a sort of intro with bits and pieces that's not heavily populated by anything in particular. The Quiet Halls is a sort of undeady area, if memory serves. The Contested Corridors, orcs have nearly chased goblins out, and there's some goblins left. And Kobold Corners is a place where there is a market. You can see a big market here. This is the settlement within the Mega Dungeon. I think there are some further. There's one more neutral ground place in this level, and then there are further down as well. In the second book, there are some more neutral groundy places. Yeah, so you can see here you get it summed up what it is, and you get the monster list. Hell's Antechamber is the most explored section, being the initial proving ground and sometimes final resting place of many starting adventurers. The Quiet Halls are plagued by the undead, symptoms of the Nycthys's growing power. The Contested Corridors places the PCs in the middle of a goblin-orc skirmish, and Kobold Corner provides the adventurers with a place to recoup and re-equip, provided they've not slain too many of Stonehell's kobold workmen during their explorations. It also houses a wizard's lost lair, of which even the dungeon's residents know nothing. Yep, it's the main entrance. There's a second entrance it mentions, which is to the Brigand's Caves, which goes to 1C. The Brigand's Caves being in Supplement 1. I'll do the other sections in review at different times. I'll do Volume 2 and I'll do the supplements, which is a weird way to do it in one way, but I think it's also natural to just say, let's sum up what else there has been added to the world by these. So, you have a much longer list of monsters. You have overview, population, rats, snakes, spiders, beetles and toads. You have a rule on the Wheel of Fortune, spin that wheel, which is, it's actually not a particularly nice wheel. There's lots of crap stuff. It's a 50-50 chance of Wheel of Woe. There are actually worse push your luck things. There's a habit there, I think, that it is not a absolute Gygax screw you dungeon. There's only a few things. You generally avoid save or die. He, generally speaking, has very few of the encounters. He has some where you're like, you try to do something. It seems like the obvious thing to do. That was a bad idea. That happens, but he's not massively into that. The one caveat is that I think when he has kind of weird stuff, like the Wheel of Fortune or whatever else, it tends towards probably you don't want to do it. And I think there are a couple of exceptions where it's like, oh, there's no negative effect to this, even though it seems like there must be. But if you want players to push the luck and do stuff, they need to have one of two attitudes, really. And this is, I'm assuming, where people are kind of semi-engaged in the game, and so that's why they're pushing their luck rather than because they're not paying enough attention to know. It's either that it's like lemmings or something. You know, they understand their lemmings are there to die or to take on a particular job for a time, and you just throw them into the meat grinder and it's fine, and it's just funny. And in that sense, your step back even from the early editions role playing, where you're trying to be the adventurer and solve the problems that adventurer would solve using the skills that adventurer has. You know, that obviously mutates later on yet further. But I think the point is at this point that, you know, role playing is about being a skilled character doing the things that character does to solve the problems in front of you. You can go back a layer further if you like, and you can say, well, no, it's just a challenge to solve, and so it doesn't matter we each have 5 PCs. It's a mega funnel, and as long as one of them survives, who cares? But I think if you're more seriously invested in the characters, then you don't want to do that. The other kind of player is going to be one who knows that there is a good chance that if he's clever, sometimes he just gets screwed, but if he's clever, he'll be able to work out some of the good stuff and some of the bad stuff, and he will be able to do something useful, basically. He'll be able to get something good out of this. And I think if you accept that, then that's a good design principle. Curtis doesn't always. You have important NPCs. There's a nice NPC you can get to know. It's still fairly gentle, and that is not what you get throughout the dungeon. there are plenty of sections of the dungeon where, and this is something for, maybe this is measured for taste, but the dungeon is a fairly aggressive dungeon for like getting on with people. Even neutral factions usually are trying to kill you, or at least, you know, you're always running reaction checks, so there's a chance they won't. I don't want to exaggerate, but there's a degree to which you're like, well, maybe I'll get on with them, but probably they just want to kill me because I'm invading their territory. What you can also see about this top level, the kobolds, by the way, are like a neutral faction functionally, who clean and try to improve the quality of the dungeon and keep it functional where they have access, and they have a trading ground, and they arrange meetings for people in the upper levels. So they are a faction you can interact with, which is obviously occasionally a way. If anything, it's the lesson you should draw from Bruce Cordell's lesser but still kind of okay module, Sunless Citadel, with the fact that, you know, you should be trying to ally with the kobolds against the goblins and against the blights. But yeah, so you've got on this one kobolds, orcs, this is the randos, berserkers, brigands, centipedes, dwarves who are going with the guy, fire beetles, ferrets, gecko lizards. This is meant to be, as I've already said, very much an intro. You fight just very generic stuff. And there's a few gimmicks. There's a glyph that teleports you to a different place. One thing, occasionally, you can see that this transports you to 24, which is... Where's 24? It's 24 in a sub-area or something. I'm trying to remember. 21, 22... you can see, yeah, this transports you. Oh, it's a different room, isn't it? Reclusive room, which you only get into and out of by the teleport. Yeah, so you've got some clever bits and pieces, but they're all fairly gentle. The monsters are mostly natural or obvious. There are zombies as well. There's some stuff like a city silhouette which you can wipe away, but will come back. There's some treasure, something about the upper levels, and it gets better towards the mid levels, but I think this is widely observed, so I think my impression is probably right of this, is that the treasure for a gold equals XP game is very sparse higher up. Remember, you're getting combat XP, but this is basic / kind of an equivalent first XP. It's quite low per hit die, and so you're not going to get very much for killing a bunch of rats, and you're still trying to get 2,000 XP for your fighting man, for your fighter. And yeah, so you're combating, and there's plenty of combat because it leans combat because it's highly chaotic as a dungeon. But you're not getting XP for any bonus activities, and you're also not getting very much treasure. The cadaver storage has 300 gold under a flagstone. Treasure is very rarely obvious. You know, your players are going to need to learn to search, and that's its own challenge in terms of teaching. A decent spell book in the reclusive room, to be fair. A giggling skull shrine, which can make you laugh hysterically for 1d6 turns, double chance of wandering monster. And there's a secret room, so you have to find the secret door, with vestments, and a needle-trapped point save or die coffer with 900 gold, 60 pieces of gold worth of jewellery, and 2 potions of healing. You could loot a lot of this quadrant and no one level up, I think, and maybe that's fine. But it's something where, and maybe the point is it's overflow. You should have done stuff above level, and now you're topping up. But you're gonna, my sense is it's going to be hard to level quickly through this because of that. Essentially, you're going to have to add treasure as the most obvious thing. Now, one thing he says is that, and this goes back to my kind of basically are some of the room keys boring. Curtis gives at the end, and I won't go to it because it's fine, but it's nothing so beautifully written we need to check. But he gives 2 tables of dungeon dressing, essentially, of, I think it's what do rooms look like, what's in random rooms, empty rooms elsewhere, and what's in containers. And the containers are things like, I mentioned when there are containers with gold in them, but if they're like, oh, I'm in a bedroomy kind of place, is there a wardrobe? You can say, yeah, and they search it and you tell them. and most of the things are worthless, and there's occasionally a small treasure or a small gimmick or a small curio. I think in one there's like a toxic spider that can make an appendage go numb and be useless for a day. It's clever. It's fun. It's a really useful dungeon dressing table, and in one sense, or in the sense that it's more interactive, it's probably a step up on Gary's dungeon dressing. And it is an attempt to solve the potential problem of it's just these lots of rooms that look the same and feel the same, which is always going to be a propensity or a danger in mega dungeons, where what you're selling your players is not, even the best of them is probably not scintillating variety in every room, but thematic coherences in areas is some cool encounters, and he gets cool encounters. Oh, you have to solve this. Oh, there's this NPC. Oh, etc. There's this weird magic thing. But I think, you're giving them thematic coherence, cool encounters, and the sense of progress. And the treasure thing is obviously a problem there, but none of those in that sense it's okay not to have a complete solution to boring rooms. But I think it's something where it's also not a complete solution to boring rooms. You're just adding bits in. You're judging, okay, well, maybe they need some decoration. And again, that's maybe partly a curse of the format, which is an interesting, positive format in lots of ways. But I think it's also just something where there just needs to be a bit more. The easiest way is to have enough treasure spread in enough places that sounds cool and is interesting, not 9,000 SP, 6 pieces of jewellery, 10 GP each, and 2 potions of healing, and that's it. And there's some slightly more varied treasure elsewhere, but a lot of the treasure is also quite boring. And being able to say, oh, you find these things, this is stuff that your players kind of record, they think about, in my experience, and which you can also set particular problems. Is why gems and jewelry are good because they're light, whereas you're like, oh, you find an altar, which is beautifully decorated stone altar, of an incredibly rare mineral. And you're like, it's worth 5,000 gold or something crazy, but it literally weighs, 2,000 pounds. How are they going to get it out there? It's a ton, literally a ton. Yeah, there's a gecko dragon. It's not actually a dragon. There's some, Rocky the Oracle's cryptic responses and clustered storerooms. I think there's there's some little kind of tables. You get another spin that wheel annoyance here. Potion of healing 1 to 4, or potion of poison 5 to 6. Yes, it's slightly more likely it's going to be good than bad, but it is something which I think Zintalan, which is a mega dungeon, which I've reviewed on this channel, I think Zintalan does the. There's an implicit world there which does this well, where there's, particularly when you read about all the adventures and henchmen who have died, that you expect that to be a fairly high turnover game. This it verges constantly on the Gothic Gonzo, whereas I think Stonehell has a straighter feel, and so possibly just racking up a body count is not as comprehensible. That's so much for the first level. Let's go. Yeah, great. We're in the second level. Oh no, we've gone back. Let's try again. So the first level is Generica, and it has some cool encounters in it, but I'm not sure it teaches players this is the D&D world, and that means that you justify departures as you go deeper, but there's a lot of it. Remember, we're saying it's actually about 130 rooms, 140 rooms on its own, and it's a lot of that is not very exciting. You want the players to go deeper, but you may struggle for them to go deeper if they're not very interested in what's going on. This one, you've got the Asylum, which is part of the Berserker cult of insane, the inmates having, or at least the mentally ill inmates having been in a particular place where they're being treated, have taken over the asylum now. Very crazy berserkers now. The Reptile House, a large area of hallways basically without doors, and the Hobgoblin Redoubt, which is the upper levels, the very upper, the upper thirds, biggest faction who are trying to take over other places and who are planning. There are outriders, they're an outriding company of the Great Horde, and they're scouting stuff and they're preparing for the invasion. So here you have a different feel. You've got factions that you can, and there are factions in the upper, in the top level, but you've got the kobolds who just want to hang out, and trade. That you've got the orcs who are mostly in charge of where they want to be, and the goblins who are vengeful. Maybe you ally with them, but there's a limited factional interaction there. And yeah, one of the more interesting places actually in there is the abandoned plated mage. Is it the plated mage, or is it someone else? It's someone else's like lab that's hidden behind kobold corners. That's one of the more interesting places. You get to here, and there are factions you can see yourself playing with. There are 3 major factions plus a non-faction area, and the factions are interesting. The hobgoblins are, in AD&D terms, they're lawful. The berserkers are crazy. The reptiles, the lizard men who are there now, it had been a snake cult. There is a drop down to level 4, is it? I think, or is it level 5? Level 5, I think, yeah. There's a drop down to level 5 from here, and that's kind of cool. Here we go. Underground tunnel exit there is a way down to level 5. So you've got one of those classic mega dungeon drops as well that you could, you see that in early notes on the concept, saying, oh, there might be places connecting this place to this place. There might be some examples of that from Kuntz's maps, which we have. Though we don't have his actual keys for Greyhawk and so on. But yeah, you have these 3 factions. The lizardmen are neutral, is my point. You have these 3 factions who can be played off against each other. It's not necessarily immediately obvious always what they want or what you can do. There are occasionally mentions through the text of, oh, this faction might like this. The goblins have a comprehensible thing because you're going to help them fight the orcs, but that's maybe the most obvious of all of them. I think for many of the others, it's not super obvious, like why they're there, or not why they're there. Sorry, what they want and what incentive you have, how you can pull them and twist them. But it is there. The reptiles, the lizardmen, and there is another. I think there's another tribe further down similarly. But the lizardmen are an example of yes, you're using reaction checks. Yes, maybe that means you can negotiate. So absolutely, that's part of the assumption of this being labyrinth lords, so basic. But I think it's the case that let me get my thought. It's the case that you're going to go in there and you're being told, and this is what the note says for the reptile house, is that they're very territorial. And you're going to be like, okay, I'm the DM, they're going to be quite territorial. And the players are going to go in there and see lizard men who are being territorial, and the chances of a negative encounter, like in the sense of combat encounter, become higher because of that. And really, they should be one of the factions that you work with and that you are friends with, or you could become friends with. But in fact, I think it's reasonably likely you're going to fall out with them and fight them. And that means that that's one of the best opportunities you have for finding allies at this level of the dungeon gone. Because you don't have a friendly dwarf prospect, well, architect, who could guide you and help you and become your friend. And to be fair, that is on the top layer, on level 1, that is an ally you could make. And this is, I think, a problem throughout, that basically it's, though there is factional play, it's very hard to actually like or want to play with any of these factions, basically. Level 3, I think level 3 is, and it says it here, it's on the third level of the Stonehell dungeon that the first but not last pockets of the strange appear. After 2 levels of simple dungeon corridors and chambers, the PCs discover that predictability is not one of Stonehell's character traits. Ancient magics have sown a dark garden under the earth here, and a massive arcane laboratory wants to be unlocked. Here, we do, I mean, the Monster Dorm is a decent gag about monster zoos, and he's like, it's weird, they're all living near each other peacefully. There's not actually a magic reason, they just do. But here you can see that this is just, there's a bit more going on here, and this stuff is interesting. This was my, maybe my favourite level. I think the lower 3 levels are basically better than the top 3, if you include the surface. The surface, I think, is a decent intro level. I like bits of 1 and 2. 1 has, a quirky and interesting settlement, kobold corners. 2 has some decent factions, and there's decent gimmicks and tricks and magic items all around. But I think in terms of dungeon design on the whole. Here, two things happen. One, he's like, I can do weird stuff. The players they're now second, hitting third level, pushing for third level. You'd think they would have you're meant to be third level going down. It depends on if you're just using treasure as written. It's still fairly sparse in the first few levels. It's sparse throughout, really. But if you're third-ish level, second to fourth here, you're going down and suddenly stuff gets weird. My concern is that the upper levels have less to hook players without a DM really throwing the kitchen sink at making it fun, which you're not buying something for you to have to do all the work to do that. But here you get a bunch of ideas. You get a plant factional area. Plant factions are fun. Intelligent plants are fun. And he breaks the quadrant rule by having a 2-quadrant area, the Hexperiment, which is this plated mage who's a major player low down in the dungeon who you have a chance of meeting here, down at level 5 in fact I think it is. But yeah, so you've got his old lab that he abandoned, level 3 monster. You can see there are a few more new monsters, I think more on this than on any other level. The monster dorm, fabulous portable elephant, is a statuette which can control can be controlled with a particular key, is it? But yeah, basically it can attack you in a particular room, but you need to go elsewhere to get the thing that turns it into a statuette. There's a few Kuntsian kind of connections, not many. There are some though. There are plenty of in the same level kind of like go here to get that, and they are mostly fine. One thing, and this is the thing where occasionally Curtis gives hints, but I think it depends. Do we think, is it that our approach is that it's fine for players to be baffled by things that are going on, to miss out on stuff because they went one place rather than the other first and they killed the creature, and that to be part of the learning experience of how you scout and do stuff? That's an argument. I think the propensity is going to be sometimes, basically I think that's a true principle, by the way. I think in fact we should all agree that should sometimes happen, but I think there's a propensity in writing like that will mean you probably sometimes set the PCs up for unjustified disappointment, where their skill has not been gainsaid, but you've just made it so that it's really hard to actually get to do stuff. And they're here because they're willing to take risks and explore, so they get to do stuff and see cool stuff. And you're like, nah, cool stuff was written in a way that you can do. Sucks, doesn't it? You can get away with that once, but I think if it's a regular experience, and I think there is a propensity here for that, then players can be like, oh, that's another disappointing dead end. That your mileage may vary. Here you've just got minor factions. Again, you could become friends with them. The Hexperiment, the bugbears are guarding a wizard who's trying to who's trying to get into the Hexperiment. There's also weird animals, bone monkeys, plated monkeys, and small men who are all created by the plated mage. The small men, because the plated mage is chaotic. The small men are neutral and trying to keep a neutral balance and do weird stuff like draw incredibly ordered labyrinths in chalk. And Curtis is like, maybe this works, maybe it doesn't, it's up to you. I think that's interesting. I would have it work. I think that's fun, but maybe not work very well because they don't have very good ways of putting the world in order. I like my Tom Bombadil songs representing the world in order, but what if you only have literally only songs versus orcs? Well, they might have a tiny impact, but they're not going to do very much. And I think the small men are like that in my head. I like them. Little people go around drawing labyrinths and setting up complex statues and whatever sculptures of rocks to try to push back against the Nycthys's excessive chaoticness. There's lots of here. Yeah, you've got a labyrinth. You've got a +1 longsword. It is a not particularly powerful. It's got a decent willpower as ego, isn't it? Decent. It's not super strong. It's neutral. It detects slightly moving walls and rooms at 10 feet and is +1. That's a decent item. The new monsters, by the way, tend to be pretty cool. On the whole, the plated monkeys are cyborg monkeys. The bone monkeys are not made actually by the plated mage, but are the remains of his experiments raised by the chaotic energy of the Nycthys. Because Curtis has made a dungeon based around chaos in the BX sense and the 3-point alignment. I think it matters. Alignment really matters in a good D&D game. I think it can matter a lot, and I think the metaphysics matter a lot. And I think this is part of what Gary explores a bit, and then is increasingly explored, most extremely and baroquely, for good and for bad, in Planescape. But the idea that the 9-point alignment system sets up all these kind of philosophical disputes and ideas and creates different tensions. The 3-point alignment system, call it the Paul Anderson and Michael Moorcock system, is that either the world is pulled down into increasing destruction, even by people who might not think they're doing that, and that's chaos, or law, and this is how, I mean, Rajik's like, no one has ever actually been lawful or chaotic. He says that in the Lamentations rulebook. I'm not sure about that, but he's like, law is this kind of like, you're trying to do good stuff and you're setting the world into order, and you're really trying to do that to an extreme degree. And if you take that metaphysical assumption, and this is praise, I prefer 9-point, but I think there's praise here that Curtis is like, okay, so there's no negative energy from the negative plane, it's just that chaos energy, which the Nycthesis represents, is just raising bones. And so the thematic stuff, you don't actually need the fluff like that. You could just be like, there's some undead monkeys. But it's only a sentence, and it helps the DM understand, and a reason to have flavour the players might not work out or have any easy way to access. Sometimes you don't want much of it, but it's to make the DM believe it might be worth running this module, because it makes sense. You tell them, by the way, there is deeper order to what I'm writing, and the DM might believe you. Yeah. The hothouse flowers, again, the Yumi folk, 4-foot tall humanoid mushrooms, they're myconids. They are, again, fiercely territorial. They're deadly adversaries. When their tribal lands are trespassed upon, their taboos are broken. This is the same problem as the lizard folk. This is the other faction I was thinking of. Actually, I really like this part, the hothouse flowers. I like this plant civilization. I like that they're neutral. They're just hanging out. There's lots of new weird animals and weird plants. There's 3 types of weird plant plus some other kind of plants described in line. There is a dryad who's been connected to the giant mushroom there, and she's like the leader. That's cool, but again, you as soon as you turn up, you're trespassing. It doesn't say about a reaction modifier, but you'd assume normally there's a reaction modifier, right? You'd be like, oh, so they're really fat. They're going to be innately aggressive. If I roll a reaction check, it's going to be a plus whatever. They're going to be more likely to be aggressive. But actually, again, that should be a chance for you if you're like, if your players learn, perhaps from a previously bad experience, with one of the other potentially useful factions in the top 2 levels, to be careful. It should be the text presents it as, and this thing that you should have, I think it is helpful for them, a writer to outline is, oh, well, if the players approach in a particular way, they may be able to make contact, but if they are brash, they're likely to be met aggressively. That's good. That's good advice. We don't get that. The Yumi folk themselves, by the way, not a bad example of his monster design. They have clubs and spears, and some of them have pottery bombs filled with natural concoctions, which is sleep, and another is like a web, and that's quite fun. They feel good and tribal. They've got interesting effects. For your 3rd level party, that's challenging, web and sleep, but they don't have to get into a fight with these guys, these little mushroom guys. Why not be nice? Why not get on with them? Spell spiders, vampiric achines, which that's actually also a plant thing. Strolling nettles, somethings, which are shambling mounds, piles of rotting vegetable matter in humanoid shape. The spell spiders are evil. The vampiric achines aren't, because they're just plants. This is he has map variety. This is square many connection dungeon. You get others which are natural caverns, you get others which are labyrinthine. You've seen some of the others as we've gone. You can find some briarbark armor, which is stud leather +1. It's treated as, and it gives you druid movement through close terrain. And if you remain motionless, you get a hide outdoors like the halfling racial ability, which it's an interesting thing actually, as an aside, to see how in early editions thief-like skills are used elsewhere. Particularly, I mean, most obviously you get versions of this for the Ranger in first edition, switching into a equivalent, but a more broadly useful non-weapon proficiency and more broadly usable non-weapon proficiency in second edition. But yeah, the idea that you might have, they're able to do this one thing. You see this with the Dragon Magazine Barbarian too. You know, able to do these things outdoors but not indoors. They can climb surfaces outdoors. I think it's an interesting way of differentiating class. And here, there is a thing where, again, Curtis is trading on the idea there is a rule set which you can know, and this is like this. The dwarves in the party might notice these changes. They will know for free that these minerals are like this, or the value of these things, because that's what dwarves are like. Because it's assuming both the vanilla setting and, well, the vanilla setting, the chaos law metaphysic, and the sort of the rules of the classes that are in basic, as well as the rest of the rules. It's able to, because it's deep, it's able to be quite deep. It's essentially able to make, because the rules are deeply accepted, the setting is deeply reactive. A danger of system neutral things is, and I think particularly truly system neutral, not like any old school edition, but truly system neutral things, is that you end up, presumably the writer's just like, well, I can't actually stat this, I've just got to say it's like this. And they don't even mean it's the same value as studded leather armor. They mean, like, you know, they're able in some way to succeed at doing this, like the thing in your game that you're actually running this with. And I think that's a weakness of that kind of writing. It becomes drab and generic. Trapped mage quarters with an unseen presence saying go away. Electrical damage on the door. Dusty opulent things. Then you got a statue, iron statue, which is an actual animate iron statue, a reading stand. At this point, remember, this is a relevant comparison. This is not terrible magic, terrible treasure for third level, but it's not for one room. But there's lots of dangers. There's an iron statue and a bad trap, which even at third level can kill you. 2d8 plus 2. 700 GP, 2 potions of extra healing, potion of invisibility, wand of magic missile, 14 charges, and a spellbook. For a dangerous room, albeit not one of the most dangerous, but pretty dangerous for the level, that's quite hard. It's a clever inclusion, by the way, that this is in this otherwise infested hothouse area that you can go and find this. But it intimates the kind of mindset of high risk, low reward, which I've kind of pointed out a couple of times before. Even at this level, where it's starting to get better, here you need 4,000 to become a third level fighter. You need 8,000 to become a third level fighter. 4,000. And you're 700 divided by 5 of you. You know, you're getting 140 or something, aren't you? It's not very much, is what I'm saying. 160 or something. For that risk, and if you're giving magic XP, sure, but basically yes. If you're just getting straight gold XP, you're not getting very much. The Hexperiment South is yet more stuff. And there's lots of stuff, and there's teleport rooms you kind of have to go through. It's the same with the north. Different puzzles, lots of puzzles in the Hexperiment. It is a heavily puzzled section more than it is a wanderer section. There are some wanderers, literally wanderers, but also there are some keyed wanderers. But generally speaking, this is a big puzzle to get through all the different rooms you can see in the Hexperiment, to get access to his private quarters of the old abandoned place. And there's good stuff in these rooms. His bedchamber. Oh no, this was Lachesis. I think the first level was... No, Lachesis is the plated mage, is he? Don't know. What's Lachesis' lover? Who knows? The lore is pretty thin. You get this explained. But yeah, you get a giant rattler. The snake is blind and attacks at -2 to hit. 75% chance. Oh, Lachesis is... someone who's on this level, who is the... Let's check who Lachesis is. Lachesis is the Medusa who lives here, and who likes to negotiate with people and has some hench people. Rufus and Tusk, the Ogre twin brothers. The Spirit of Kasaya, who is the Plato Mage's old assistant, who's a spirit, and Skelmis, who is a mage. Oh no, so Kasaya you can free if you get to the centre, and then Kasaya has gone mad and will pretend to want to help you and then will betray you. Skelmis is a mage who's neutral, and Rufus and Tusk are chaotic ogre twins. Skelmis is being, is it domination or something else like that, to serve the Chasis, and yeah, so there's this little faction there which you can get up to round here, and there's the bottom of the experiment there. You can see an example of some of the stuff that's in the experiment by this Chamber of Passion. You have to conjure a fire elemental within the ring there, an earth elemental in the strength one, and it's the same on the other side. This is actually quite high level. You're not going to be doing this at 3rd or 4th level, really, are you? But you can return there. It gives value. You've explored, you found the outskirts, you go down, and then you come back up and you're like, let's go and look at this later. And I think that's legitimate. It obviously limits the leveled quality of this, that the big puzzle that's the centre of it, where you have to work out what it wants and you have to have the power to do it, is definitely not 3rd level. Level 4 master map. Here this is heavily caved. There's residential tombs and the Temple of Pain. Here you are yeah, this is lots. There's some more tribal stuff and factions. The Temple of Pain, I think, is it constructs and undead of the old Temple of Pain there. The living caves are more like yeah, more animalistic, as it says here. The living caves are home to ogres and some of the depraved descendants of the original inmates. This is the cannibal berserkers, not the kind of crazy people up on the 2nd level. The living and the Temple of Pain and the residential tombs are both transient monsters, and the gentlemen ghouls who had been like sin eaters who metaphorically ate sin, but who, when they're imprisoned, became actual cannibals or something. And they're kind of a faction you might get on with. There's a Fallout New Vegas quest that either inspired them or was inspired by this. It almost feels like, but yeah, there's this this dynamic going on where you could be friends with them, but it does. And Curtis gives the note, whether you are invited for dinner or invited to be dinner depends on how you deal with the ghouls, and that's good. The idea that you can actually, that is a faction that you're encouraged to play nice with and deal with well, and that who want to be good. And they have their own little clubhouse and stuff. This is probably in some ways a slightly less exciting level, I think it's fair to say, but it's okay. As the Gentleman Ghouls are good, and the level 5 is the Hall of the Mountain Trolls. You've got this is all funky stuff basically. By this point you're at full on, this is all weird. At the halfway point, the Out of Time Mine is like a puzzled area which you are told by Curtis to warn the players about diegetically through rumours or whatever, because once they're in they can't get out unless they solve the puzzle. There's like a beast, a monster that has trapped it in time essentially and has undead miners working for him in this gold mine. It's very valuable, but you need to cleanse and destroy and exorcise that monster. Song of Night Screams is a black dragon who can shapeshift and hangs around on upper levels in elf form or with the lizardman in crocodile form. So yeah, that's fun. It's, again, that's very dangerous for this level. Only a young dragon, so I think it's like 6 HD maybe, but is still, that's going to be, as it says, it's one of the most powerful inhabitants to this point, and plenty of 4th to 5th level parties would be well advised to steer clear, because the breath weapon is going to take a bunch of you out. The and the Hall of the Mountain Trolls, there are remnants of the old troll civilization that lived here, which may be feasting. They feast a lot of the time. They are chaotic, again, like some of the upper level ones. I think there's a sense, I read it and I understand you're kind of meant to be able to potentially play people off. You're meant to potentially be able to make friends. You might be able to say, okay, well, I've cleared out the gold mine, how about we ally? I've got a large adventuring party, but how about we ally to do something and we share the gold? Yeah, and the Chamber of Many Faces is where your drow live, your Vrilya, who are elfin underground dwellers with weird ancient weaponry and who are chaotic but kind of having an advanced and serious civilization, which it extends further down. You only get their 2 junior castes up here. Very slightly reminiscent to me of the Eld, the David Bowie Eld from the Hill Cantons world. So yeah, there's lots of good ideas there as well. This is the coolest level possibly in terms of all these things are interesting. Basically, none of these quadrants like, yeah, that's okay. All of them are cool. I like. There's a Dragon's Lair. There's a weird puzzle kind of level, like, you know, which feels very video game-ish in that way. There's the decayed remnants of a civilization who wants to become great again. That's where they raid. And there is a faction that's going to be more powerful downstairs. There is also a meeting ground where different factions can meet. Is it here or is that in the Living Caves? That actually might be the Living Caves. I think it's here. And yeah, it's interesting. There's lots of stuff going on, and I think and your players will remember those things. And the Vril, you have weird tech, and there's the time lock on the other thing, and there's you've got a shape-shifting dragon with a kind of weird area around them. Let's just have a look at that one as a final thing. Yeah, you've got a snake-themed spellbook which has loads of gems on it, albeit it's only 500 gold of it. You have a snake trap of infinite snakes. You've got chutes and pits. It's all snaky themed. You got, because it was the Snake Cult's headquarters that had its base up where the lizard men were. There's yellow mould. There's a petrified gelatinous cube. That's quite fun. There's an owlbear nest. There's a clockwork canary. That's actually a pretty good item. I like that one. It's loads of dead canaries, but there's a clockwork canary that sings when within 20 feet of poison gas. It makes some money if sold as a curio. The dead chill area is only 400 gold plus 5, so 500 gold. You still got kind of just crappy treasure, basically, especially at your fourth to fifth level. Let's say Clucking Death is where the cockatrices are. Wand device negation. Cockatrice eggs, they're probably the most valuable thing. Some jewellery, some gems. You've got a couple of thousand in there, basically. If that. Just, you're taking a lot of risk to get fairly small pockets of money. And there's no dump that's like, okay, you get through these challenges and here's 8,000 gold up to this level, which is perfectly reasonable at that kind of level, is that you just get a place here, even the locked and dangerous places. I mean, to be fair, the Dragon's Lair does have legit gold. 4,500 in silver, 20,000 in electrum, 20,000 in gold, a filter of love, potion of giant strength, an X +1, a sword +1 / +3 versus regenerating creatures, and a scroll of ward against elementals. That's really good. There's basically no other hordes like it, more or less, in the whole place. There'd be small exceptions, but generally speaking, in that case, you also have to go and kill a dragon. There's some sense, like, you get some decent tactical notes about when the dragon's around, how they get warned of you being there if they're asleep. And there's a chance, therefore, that you could burgle. And I think that should be encouraged, and that's good. And it's not at all ruled out. It's set up. There are order of battle notes. But generally speaking, that's really the exception. Otherwise, you're often taking high levels of danger for little reward. So, what to sum this up? That's a tour of Stonehell. I think it is a good module. I could see myself stealing bits from it. I don't want to run it as a mega dungeon. I think ASE or Zintalan are more my speed and fun for that. But both basic in some format as well. ASE is officially Labyrinth Lore as well. I think I like the completeness of it. We'll address that next time. I think the way in which it becomes progressively weirder, starting from vanilla roots, is a good idea. I think the sheer scale of that is a problem, because it means you're going through a lot of stuff that isn't always inspiring. I think the formatting is really clever, but I think that it's fair to say that it's limited or limiting, because it means you have fewer evocative great places. That's fine. I can take that trade-off. If I wanted to run it, I'd be like, yeah, that's fine. And there are attempts to cure it, but the deep issues are there to do with things like not much. The issues are there beyond that. Poor treasure, like limited treasure, and not very excitingly written treasure. and occasionally just areas of potentially high interactivity, but it's only hinted at that there's all this potential interactivity. There's some very good puzzles, there's some very good specifically fun NPCs or NPC factions or NPC concepts, you know, your gentlemen ghouls, your mushroom men, your dragon, the dark elves, you know. One thing though is, and the kobolds are good to be fair, and it's the dwarves okay, but you've got to go deeper to get places, and you're talking about players investing a lot into a game, which may seem like, so we're learning about vanilla D&D, are we? Oh well, we cleared the gatehouse, and then we cleared the caves that we could, and then we went down and we did some stuff here, and we did make some now a good DM, a better DM perhaps than I, will be able to be like, okay, I've made it exciting, I'm just really throwing myself into it, and I'm just adding stuff on the fly, and I changed this, and to be fair, he's happy with you changing it, Curtis is. But there's a limitation there, and if you're going to run it, you're going to have to address that. You're going to have to think, either do I actually just replace sections that aren't very exciting, or do I heavily rewrite them using the maps, see them as Dyson maps basically, or do I run as is but just throw myself into adding stuff and adding atmosphere and generally emphasizing the interactivity of the factions and NPCs through what I draw from this. That's fine. Like, I think that's what a DM should be doing. But I think it's just something that the book is lacking on, and that's, if you're spending money on this, you've got to take that into account, you know, that you're spending money on something you're correcting. Anyway, that's what I thought about Stonehell 1, Down Night Haunted Halls, which is basically you could learn a lot from reading this. There's a lot of good stuff in this. It's a great accomplishment. It's not perfect. That's my thoughts. You tell me your thoughts in the comments. Tell me particularly if you've run or played in Stonehell, and I'll see you next time.